The right has a new strategy going into the 2020 elections that they've already debuted in one gubernatorial election to get people scared about the transgender community. Take a look at an ad that ran in the Kentucky governor's race.
All any athlete wants is a fair shot in competition. To play by the rules. To show how hard work pays off and how champions are made. But what if the rules change? If Andy Beshear gets his way, there won't be any rules. Anyone at any time can change teams for any reason. Beshear calls this equality. But is it fair? Vote against Andy Beshear. He's too extreme for Kentucky.
Joining us to comment, Zeke Stokes. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
How's it? Well, we're very glad to have you on, and we should mention that ad ran in an election that the Democrat did end up winning, but it could potentially be a preview of what this American Principles Project is going to be doing in other races. What did you think about their attempt to take down Andy Beshear on that issue?
Well, we've seen this so many times before in political races around the country, and it really does, I think, demonstrate just how morally and politically bankrupt the Republican Party is. But we can't, I don't think, discount these kinds of attacks. It was a really close race in Kentucky. There were a lot of things at play there, including a Republican governor that wasn't all that popular with his own Republican base. This is a playbook we've seen for a generation from the Republicans, generations, in fact. They do it on race, they do it on immigration, they do it to Muslims, they do it on guns. It's all about fear, and this is a strategy that they've employed before, that we've seen work in many cases, and we may see work again. And we have to be incredibly vigilant when we look to places like Michigan, where a few votes made a very big difference in 2016. Just 10,000 votes, Trump won the state by. A few voters who are receiving fear and not facts from the other side can make a big difference. And so we have to be incredibly vigilant. So I'm worried when I see reports that Democrats aren't spending enough on digital ads and the places where people are really seeing these kinds of damaging and dangerous messages.
Well, on this particular issue, we had Parker Malloy of Media Matters on a few months back to talk about how, there's been attacks against the transgender community from the right, but they really do seem to be focusing these days on the sports thing. They're suddenly interested in high school and college women's sports in a way that they never have been before, supposedly because of this ever-present threat that men are going to simply decide one day that they want to pretend that they're transgender. And it's my belief that has never actually happened, that that's actually not an issue in these sports. But why do you think it is that they're focusing on this area now?
I think if these were well-intended people, we might just say this is a solution in search of a problem, but it's so much more than that. They tried this in 2014 and 2016 after we saw the passage of marriage equality as sort of their next stand. It was going to be the transgender community, and so they started going around this bathroom message that bathrooms weren't going to be safe. We saw the state of North Carolina pass a draconian law around bathrooms and transgender protections, and we saw the backlash around that. The governor of North Carolina was defeated because of that. So we saw that not working, and we saw states like Texas and others saying no to that kind of legislation. So now that hasn't worked, so they're going to the next depth, which is this idea that somehow there's this epidemic of boys who want to play on girls' teams in college and high school and vice versa, and it simply doesn't exist. It's all about scaring parents to believe that there's going to be somebody in the locker room who's a threat to their kid, and it's simply not true.
Hey, Zeke, so how do we push back against this? Because there obviously hasn't been, as John mentioned, this same sort of passion when it comes to women's sports. A lot of these same people are still arguing that the US women's soccer team shouldn't be paid the same as the men. None of these people are, speaking out about equality when it comes to women's sports versus men's sports. And so it's very see-through. Mm-hmm. And how do we, as, the public, push back against this?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is make sure that progressives are registered and ready to go vote this year. I just saw a study from our own LGBTQ community that indicates that 1 in every 5 LGBTQ people is not registered to vote. And again, when you go to a state like Michigan and you look at the 10,000 vote differential there for Trump that put him over the top in 2016, there are 76,000 unregistered and unvoting LGBTQ people just in the state of Michigan. Our vote alone could change some of these battleground states. And when you extrapolate that to other marginalized communities, women, people of color, immigrants, the Muslim community, others who've been attacked by this administration, the power is in our hands. And unfortunately, there's not much else we can do at this point except go defeat these folks at the ballot box.
You know, as we pointed out, that attempt to take down Andy Bashir, he narrowly won, although as you say, there were many factors playing into that. But it's likely that the American Principles Project is not done running ads, and they're probably gonna get involved in both the primaries and the general election coming up in 2020. What do we know about this organization so that people going into this election, when they see this group behind ads, they might know where it's coming from?
Sure thing. This is part of a big orchestrated, connected network of right-wing organizations like Focus on the Family, and Tony Perkins, and the same players that we've seen before. 1 million so-called moms, which really is just a few old white guys in an office somewhere in Texas, claiming to speak for moms. It's an orchestrated movement that rears its head every couple of years with a new name, a new tax status, but they're all doing exactly the same thing. They're shadowy groups. They're made up and funded by anonymous donors that want to turn the clock back on the progress that progressives and marginalized communities have made over the last couple of decades. So, I think you can expect organizations like GLAAD and others to really be doing their due diligence and uncovering who these people are, who they're funded by, what their real agenda is. We know it's not a pro-family agenda. It's an anti-American, anti-LGBTQ agenda, and we're going to all have to be on the lookout and educating ourselves and each other about what the real agenda of organizations like this are. And in a time when Facebook and others are allowing unfettered access to the public space without the protection of fact checking, it's unfortunately incumbent upon all of us to do the fact checking for them.
I couldn't agree more. Zeke Sok, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.